The Arizona sun hung low over the San Carlos River, painting the canyon walls in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. Sarah Yazzie stood at the edge of the weathered wooden bridge, her fingers gripping the rough railing as if it might suddenly give way. The late afternoon wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, tugging at her long black hair tied back in a simple braid. "It's just a bridge," she whispered to herself, but her feet remained planted on solid ground. The rushing water below seemed to mock her hesitation, its voice echoing off the canyon walls. From behind came the clip-clop of hooves on packed earth. Thomas McKenna, the rancher from the neighboring property, approached on his bay mare. She'd seen him at the trading post in Globe, always alone, always quiet. The townspeople said he'd bought the old Harrison Ranch 5 years ago after his wife died, seeking solitude in the high desert. Thomas dismounted, his weathered boots raising small clouds of dust. Tall and lean, with premature grey threading through his dark hair, he led his horse toward the bridge. "Afternoon," he said simply, touching the brim of his hat. Sarah nodded, but didn't move. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "The river remembers, granddaughter. It remembers what the bridge tries to forget." Thomas paused beside her, following her gaze to the water below. The San Carlos ran clear and cold, perhaps 4 feet at its deepest point. "Bridge has been here since 1952, Thomas said conversationally. "Built by the CCC boys. Good, solid construction." "I know when it was built." Sarah's jaw tightened. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the river's murmur and a distant hawk's cry. Sarah tensed, expecting him to cross and leave her standing there with her irrational fear. Everyone else did. Her cousin Maria called her stubborn. Her brother Joe said she was stuck in the old ways. But Thomas didn't move toward the bridge. Instead, he studied the river below, his grey eyes thoughtful. "My wife was afraid of thunderstorms," he said quietly. "Couldn't stand them. Would shake like a leaf every time the sky darkened. I used to think it was silly, just noise and light. But fear doesn't care about logic." His face was calm, distant, as if seeing something beyond the canyon walls. "One night, big storm rolled in while we were driving back from Tucson. She was white-knuckling the door handle, trying not to cry. I could have kept driving, gotten us home faster. Instead, I pulled over under an overpass. We sat there for 2 hours, watching the lightning paint the desert silver, listening to the rain. I held her hand the whole time." He looked at Sarah then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Understanding without judgment. Never did cure her fear, but sitting with her through it, that mattered more than fixing it. Sarah's grip on the railing loosened slightly. Below them, the river continued its eternal conversation with the stones. "Your grandmother was Celia Yazzie, wasn't she? I bought some of her baskets at the cultural center. Beautiful work." "She passed last spring," Sarah said, the words still bitter. "I'm sorry. She was a keeper of stories, I heard." Sarah nodded. She knew all the old stories. About this place. About... She gestured helplessly at the bridge, unable to articulate the weight of history that pressed down on her shoulders. Then Thomas did something that surprised her. He led his mare down the steep path that zigzagged toward the river's edge. Sarah watched, bewildered, as he carefully picked his way down the rocky slope. At the water's edge, he turned back to look up at her. "You planning to cross today?" he called up. Sarah's cheeks burned. I need to get to the other side. My truck's parked at the Johnson's place." She'd walked the 3 miles from her house, hoping that this time, maybe this time, she could force herself across. Thomas nodded, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. He sat down on a flat boulder and began unlacing his boots. Sarah watched in growing amazement as he rolled up his jeans to his knees and removed his socks. "What are you doing?" she called down. He looked up at her, shading his eyes with one hand. "Well, if you're not taking the bridge, I figure we'll wade across. Water's not too cold this time of year." "We?" Sarah's voice cracked. Thomas stood, testing the water with one bare foot. "Unless you'd prefer to go alone. But I need to get to the other side too, and Dusty here doesn't mind getting her feet wet." He patted the mare's neck affectionately. "Besides, sometimes the long way around is the only way that makes sense." Sarah stared at him. In all her 28 years, no one had ever offered to simply walk with her. They'd cajole, reason, even mock. But this quiet rancher was standing knee-deep in cold river water, waiting patiently as if he had all the time in the world. "You don't even know me," she said. Thomas shrugged. "Know you're someone who needs to cross a river. Know you've got your reasons for not taking the bridge. That's enough." Sarah found herself moving down the path before she'd made a conscious decision. By the time she reached the river's edge, her heart was pounding. But for once, not from fear. Thomas had waded out to the middle of the stream, where the water reached just above his knees. The current tugged at his jeans, but he stood firm. Dusty followed placidly. Sarah sat on the same boulder he'd used and slowly removed her worn hiking boots. The first touch of water against her skin was a shock, colder than expected, with an underlying current that seemed to pull at more than just her feet. She gasped. "Take your time," Thomas said. "River's been here long before us. It's not going anywhere." Sarah took a breath and stepped fully into the water. The stones beneath were smooth and slippery. She had to move carefully, feeling for stable spots with each step. The water rose to her calves, then her knees. Halfway across, she froze. The current was stronger here, more insistent. She could hear her grandmother's voice mixing with the water's song. "They built that bridge over bones, little one. Built it over sorrow." "Sarah?" Thomas's voice was calm, steady. He'd stopped a few feet ahead, turned back to watch her. "I can't," she whispered. "Okay," he said simply. "We'll stand here a bit." And they did. Two strangers standing in the middle of the San Carlos River while the sun painted its daily masterpiece across the sky. Dusty lowered her head to drink, and a family of quail called to each other from the far bank. "My grandmother," Sarah said suddenly, the words tumbling out. "She told me about the old crossing, before the bridge. People would wade across right here, where we're standing, for hundreds of years. This was the safe place, the shallow place." Thomas listened, saying nothing. Then, in 1941, there was a flash flood. A family was crossing, the Benales, parents and 3 children. "The water came down from the mountains without warning," her voice caught. "They found the bodies 2 miles downstream." The river gurgled around their legs, innocent and indifferent. After that, the Apache Council asked for a bridge, begged for it, but it took 11 years. And when they finally built it, she gestured helplessly at the wooden structure above them. "My grandmother said they built it in the wrong place, too close to where it happened. She said the spirits were confused, couldn't find their way home." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Is that why you can't cross? The spirits?" Sarah shook her head, frustrated. "I don't know. Maybe. It's not logical. But every time I try, I feel them, feel their fear, the water rising, the children screaming. I think," Thomas said slowly, "that places hold memory. Maybe not spirits exactly, but trauma leaves a mark. On land, on people, on communities." He shifted his weight. "My grandfather was at Normandy, went back 50 years later for the anniversary. Said he could still smell the gunpowder, still hear the screams, but he walked the beach anyway, not because he'd conquered the fear, but because he needed to honor it. Honor them." They stood in silence again. Sarah noticed things she'd missed before. The way the late afternoon light turned the ripples to liquid gold, the small fish darting between rocks. "I'm ready," she said. Thomas nodded and turned toward the far shore. They walked slowly, Sarah placing each foot with care. When they finally stepped onto dry land, Sarah's legs were shaking, but she was smiling. They sat on sun-warmed rocks, letting their feet dry. Thomas offered his bandana, and she took it gratefully, wiping away tears she hadn't realized had fallen. "Thank you," she said simply. Thomas nodded, pulling on his socks and boots. I cross this bridge every Tuesday and Friday. Supply runs to town. If you ever need to cross again, you'll walk the river with me? A small smile creased his weathered face. If that's what it takes. He mounted Dusty and touched his hat brim again, then rode up the steep trail. Sarah watched him go, this strange, quiet man who'd waded through cold water in his jeans without a single complaint. When he was out of sight, she turned back to the river. The bridge loomed above, casting long shadows. But for the first time, it didn't look like a barrier. It looked like what it was, wood and nails and history, painful and necessary in equal measure. As she walked to her truck, she thought about Thomas McKenna, who understood that sometimes the only way forward is to stand still in moving water, waiting for courage to catch up with necessity. She thought about grace, not the absence of fear, but the presence of someone willing to witness it without judgment. The desert evening was painting itself in purples and roses by the time she reached her truck. She climbed in and sat for a moment, watching the first stars emerge. Next Tuesday, Thomas had said, supply run to town. Sarah put the truck in gear and headed home, already knowing she'd be at the bridge again. Tuesday arrived with a dawn that bled crimson across the desert sky. Sarah had been awake since 4, sitting on her porch with coffee that had long gone cold. She changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on practical jeans and a faded blue work shirt. She arrived at the bridge at 9:30. Thomas was already there. Dusty ground-tied near a cluster of Palo Verde trees. He was crouched by the river's edge, filling a canteen. "Morning," he said, straightening. "Wasn't sure you'd come." "Wasn't sure myself," Sarah admitted. She looked at the bridge, then at the river. Today, the water seemed lower, tamer, but the knot in her stomach remained. "You really meant it? About crossing through the water?" "I don't say things I don't mean." He capped the canteen. "Though I did bring extra socks this time. Learned my lesson about wet boots." Despite her nerves, Sarah smiled. "Practical." They made their way down to the water's edge. This time, Sarah noticed things she'd missed in her fear. The ancient petroglyphs on a boulder near the path, the way the willows bent toward the water like supplicants at prayer. As they removed their boots, Sarah asked, "Why Tuesdays and Fridays?" "Feed store's freshest on Tuesdays," Thomas replied, "and Dolores at the bank is only in on Fridays. She's been helping me sort out some deed issues." He paused. "Plus, routine helps. After Amy died, I needed structure, something to anchor the days." Amy. His wife's name had been Amy. They entered the water together this time. Sarah still hesitated at the deeper middle section, but Thomas simply stopped when she did, patient as the stones beneath their feet. "Tell me about the petroglyphs," he said eventually. Sarah glanced back at the boulder. "They're old, older than anyone remembers. My grandmother said they tell the story of the first crossing, when the river was young and wild. The spirals represent the journey, both physical and spiritual. The handprints," she swallowed, "they're a promise. That others have passed this way before, that we don't walk alone. There's something similar on my property, a rock face near the eastern boundary, covered in symbols. I've wondered what they mean." "I could look at them," Sarah offered, then immediately felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I mean, if you want, I'm not an expert, but my grandmother taught me some of the old symbols." "I'd appreciate that," Thomas said simply. They completed the crossing with minimal conversation, but the silence felt different from before, less charged with fear, more companionable. On the far bank, as they dried their feet, Sarah found herself studying Thomas more openly. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and had aged into something better, character written in every line. "Coffee?" he asked, producing a thermos from his saddlebag. They sat on a fallen cottonwood log, sharing coffee from the thermos lid. The coffee was strong and black, with a hint of cinnamon that surprised her. "My abuela's recipe," Thomas explained. She always said coffee without cinnamon was like a day without sunrise. Possible, but why would you want to? You speak Spanish. Some. Grew up in southern New Mexico, little town called Hatch. He smiled at some memory. Amy used to joke that I courted her in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and silence. Said the silence was the most eloquent. There it was again, the easy mention of his late wife. Not dwelling, not avoiding, just acknowledging her as part of his story. How long were you married? Sarah asked. 16 years. Would have been 21 this December. I'm sorry. He nodded, accepting the sympathy. What about you? Family. Sarah found herself telling him about her life, her job at the tribal museum, her small house on the reservation, her brother Joe, who worked construction in Phoenix and worried too much. No husband, boyfriend? Thomas asked, then looked embarrassed. Sorry, that's none of my business. It's okay. There was someone, Marcus. We were together 3 years. He couldn't understand, well, things like the bridge. He said I let the past control me too much. Maybe he was right. Or maybe he was wrong, Thomas said quietly. Maybe honoring the past isn't the same as being controlled by it. They sat in comfortable silence until Thomas checked his watch. I should head to town. Will you be okay getting back across? Sarah looked at the river, then at the bridge. I'll manage. Same time Friday? She nodded, not trusting her voice. There was something happening here, something she didn't quite understand. After Thomas rode away, Sarah sat by the river for a long time. Eventually, she waded back across alone. It was harder without Thomas there, but she made it. When she reached the other side, she felt a small flame of pride kindle in her chest. That evening, she called her mother. I met someone, she said without preamble. Oh? Her mother's voice carried carefully controlled interest. Tell me. His name is Thomas. He's different. He helped me cross the river. There was a long pause. The Bridge River. Yes. And he helped you. How? Sarah smiled, remembering. He walked through the water with me. Didn't try to fix me or convince me to use the bridge, just walked with me. Ah. Her mother's voice was warm now. A patient man. Mom, I'm scared. Of him? No. Of letting someone in again. Of being too much. Marcus said, Marcus, her mother interrupted firmly, was a fool. This Thomas, does he make you feel like too much? Sarah thought about standing in the river, Thomas waiting without impatience. No, he makes me feel like exactly enough. Then perhaps, her mother said gently, it's time to let the river wash away more than just fear. Friday came with clouds building over the mountains, purple dark and heavy with promise. Sarah arrived at the bridge early, finding Thomas already there, studying the sky with concern. Storm coming, he said. Might want to postpone. No. Sarah surprised herself with the firmness. Unless you need to. I don't mind a little rain. They made their way down to the river quickly. The water was already slightly higher, murky with runoff. They removed their boots in what was becoming practice synchronization. Halfway across, the first fat raindrops began to fall. By the time they reached the opposite bank, it was pouring. They scrambled for cover under an overhang of red rock, laughing and breathless. Dusty found her own shelter under a thick juniper. They sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the rain transform the landscape. Within minutes, small waterfalls cascaded over the canyon walls, and the river began to swell. Good timing, Thomas observed. Sarah nodded, mesmerized by the sudden violence of the water. This was what her grandmother's stories warned about, the river's dual nature. Are you afraid? Thomas asked quietly. Yes, but it's different. I'm afraid of the river's power, which seems appropriate. Not like the bridge fear, which is all tangled up with grief and history. Fear as wisdom versus fear as wound. Yes, exactly. Sarah turned to look at him. How do you do that? Understand things I can barely articulate. Thomas was quiet, watching the rain. After Amy died, I spent a lot of time trying to understand fear. Mine, hers, everyone's. Figured if I could understand it, maybe I could make sense of losing her. He picked up a small stone. Never did make sense of the loss, but I learned about fear, how it can be a teacher or a tyrant. Which was it for you? Both. Tyrant first, I was afraid of everything. Then one day, about 2 years ago, I couldn't remember if Amy preferred coffee or tea in the afternoon. Just couldn't remember. I panicked. Tore the house apart looking for evidence. Sarah watched his profile in the grey light. Finally found an old grocery list in her handwriting. Earl Grey tea, 2 boxes, and I sat on the kitchen floor and cried. He tossed the stone into the rain. That's when I realized the fear of forgetting was keeping me from actually remembering. From letting her be a whole person in my memory, not just a collection of details I was terrified of losing. What did you do? Started letting her go, piece by piece, not forgetting, never that, but letting her be in the past instead of trying to drag her into every present moment. He looked at Sarah. That's when I bought the ranch here, needed somewhere new. They sat in silence, watching the storm. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. This man beside her had walked through his own deep water. The petroglyphs on your land, she said. I'd still like to see them, if the offer stands. Tomorrow? Weather's supposed to clear. You could come by in the morning, stay for lunch if you'd like. Okay. Sarah felt her heart race, but it wasn't fear this time. The rain began to slacken. They waited until the river calmed slightly, then made their careful way back across. The water was higher, more insistent, but with Thomas beside her, Sarah could meet its challenge. On the eastern bank, as they pulled on their boots, Thomas said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me walk with you. For sharing your river." He stood, offered her a hand up. I'd forgotten what it felt like. To be useful to someone. To be present. Sarah took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. For a moment they stood close, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Thomas stepped back, touched his hat, and moved toward Dusty. "Tomorrow, then," he said. "Tomorrow," Sarah agreed. That night she called her brother Joe. "I'm seeing someone," she said. "Sort of. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" "He's helping me cross the bridge, the San Carlos Bridge." Silence. Then, "Sarah, that's... how?" "He walks through the river with me." More silence. "This I got to see. What's his name?" "Thomas McKenna. He owns the old Harrison Ranch." "The hermit rancher. Sarah, nobody sees that guy." "He talks to me," Sarah said softly. Joe sighed. "Just be careful, okay?" After they hung up, Sarah stood on her porch, looking out at the desert night. Tomorrow she would go to Thomas's ranch. She would look at ancient symbols carved in stone and maybe learn more about this man who understood the geography of grief. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah followed Thomas's directions down a dirt road that wound between red rock mesas. His ranch sat in a natural bowl of land, protected on 3 sides by low hills. The house was modest, adobe walls the color of dust, a tin roof, a deep porch wrapped around 2 sides, but it was the setting that took her breath away. This was high desert at its most beautiful. Thomas emerged from the barn as she parked, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd shaved more carefully than usual, and the realization that he'd made an effort for her visit sent warmth through her chest. "Morning. Find it okay? Your directions were perfect. This place is incredible. It has its moments." He gestured toward the eastern hills. "Petroglyphs are about a 20-minute walk." They set off along a trail through ancient saguaros. Thomas pointed out landmarks, a lightning-struck juniper housing cactus wrens, a seep where javelinas drank. "How long have the Apache been in this area?" he asked. "Depends who you ask. Anthropologists say 500 years, but our stories say we've always been here. that we emerged from the earth itself. They climbed natural stone steps to a sheltered alcove. The morning sun slanted across the rock wall, illuminating dozens of symbols carved into stone. Sarah's breath caught. "Oh, these are beautiful." She moved closer, fingers hovering above the ancient marks. "This spiral represents the sun's journey. These figures holding hands, it's about community, connection." She traced the air above wavy lines. "Water, always water in our stories." Thomas stood beside her, close enough that she could smell soap and leather. "What about this one?" He indicated a circle with a cross inside. "The four directions, sacred to many tribes. It represents balance, wholeness." She glanced at him. "Interesting you'd notice that one. Why?" "It's about finding your place in the world, being centered when everything spins." Their eyes met and held before Sarah looked back at the wall. "These are different from the river ones. Older. And look, these symbols aren't Apache. They're from people who came before. Layers of history," Thomas said softly. "Yes, each generation adding their story." Sarah studied a handprint. "My grandmother brought me to places like this. Said they were libraries holding stories we'd forgotten how to tell." "Did she teach you to read them?" "Some. Not enough." Regret colored her voice. "I was young, wanted to be modern. Now I wish I'd listened better." "Maybe that's okay," Thomas said. "Maybe each generation finds their own way of understanding. Your grandmother gave you the foundation. What you build, that's your story." They stayed another hour, Sarah explaining symbols while Thomas asked thoughtful questions. On the walk back, he showed her a hidden spring where maidenhair ferns grew in impossible green luxury. The ranch house was cool inside, with thick adobe walls. The living room was sparse but comfortable, worn leather sofa, bookshelves lined with histories, native art on the walls. "Is that my grandmother's basket?" Sarah recognized the pattern. "Bought it at the cultural center. They said it was one of the last she made." Sarah touched it gently. "She made this the winter before she died. Had such trouble with arthritis, but insisted on finishing. Said she had one more story to tell." In the kitchen, Thomas put her to work chopping onions while he browned meat for stew. They worked in companionable rhythm. "You like to cook," she observed. "Learned from my abuela. She said a man who couldn't feed himself was half alive." He added green chilies, the scent making her mouth water. "Amy loved to bake but hated cooking. We made a good team." Tell me about her," Sarah said, surprising herself. Thomas paused, then continued stirring. "She was light. That's the best description. She had this way of making everything feel less heavy. Laughed at my terrible jokes, sang in the shower, danced in the kitchen while she baked. Terrible dancer, no rhythm at all. Didn't stop her." "How did you meet?" "College, New Mexico State. I was studying agriculture, she was in education, statistics class together. She asked to borrow my notes, and somehow that turned into coffee, then dinner, then 20 years. Just like that? Sometimes you know." He glanced at her. "She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 3 years before she died. Fought it hard. The last year was difficult. She wasn't herself anymore. The pain medication, the fear, it changed her." Sarah moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. "I loved her through it all. But sometimes I wonder if I loved her or just the memory of her." Without thinking, Sarah placed her hand over his on the counter. "Love isn't just the easy parts. It's staying when things get dark. It's walking through the river when someone can't cross the bridge." Thomas turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. "Is that what we're doing? Walking through rivers?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "I just know that when I'm with you, things that have been frozen for years start to thaw, and that terrifies me." He squeezed her hand gently, then released it to tend the stew. But the warmth lingered. They ate on the porch, watching shadows shift across the desert. The stew was perfect, rich and complex with just enough heat. They ate in comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something about Marcus?" Thomas said as they finished. Sarah tensed. "Okay. You said he thought you let the past control you. What did he want?" "He wanted me to be easier, less complicated. He loved the idea of being with an Apache woman, the exotic factor, but not the reality, the ceremonies, the family obligations. When I couldn't cross the bridge, he lost it. Said I was using my culture as an excuse to avoid living. Or maybe," Thomas said quietly, "he couldn't see the difference between hiding and honoring, between being stuck and being rooted." Sarah looked at him, this man who'd lost everything and found a way to keep living. "What are we doing here, Thomas? This thing between us, what is it?" He was quiet, looking out at the desert. "I don't know. I know I look forward to Tuesdays and Fridays now. I know that watching you read those petroglyphs today, seeing your face light up, that made me happier than I've been in a long time. But I'm not sure I know how to do this anymore. Be with someone. I'm out of practice." Sarah stood, moved to lean against the porch railing near him. "Maybe that's okay. Maybe we can be out of practice together." He looked up at her, and she saw fear there and hope. "I'd like that." They spent the afternoon walking his property, Sarah teaching him medicinal plants, Thomas showing her the improvements he'd made to the land. "Stay for dinner?" he asked as the sun began its descent. She should say no. Should go home. Think about this, be sensible. Instead, "Only if you let me make the salad, and I'll need to borrow a shirt." He smiled fully. "I think I can manage that." The shirt he gave her was soft flannel, worn, thin. It smelled like him. They prepared dinner together, moving around each other with increasing ease. After dinner on the porch again, watching stars emerge, neither wanted to part. "Thank you for today," Sarah said eventually, "for showing me your place, for trusting me with... Thank you for coming, for helping me see this place through new eyes." He stood, offered a hand up. Tuesday. They stood facing each other in the porch light. Sarah thought he might kiss her, wanted him to, but he just touched her cheek gently, a gesture so tender it was almost more intimate than a kiss. Driving home in his shirt, Sarah felt something fundamental shifting. She'd spent so long being afraid, but Thomas had shown her a different way. Not fearlessness, but courage. Not forgetting the past, but making room for the future alongside it. The autumn weeks folded into each other, each Tuesday and Friday adding another chapter. The crossings became easier, not because the fear went away, but because it became familiar. Sometimes they talked as they waded, sometimes they were silent. Always, Thomas matched his pace to hers. By late October, the cottonwoods had turned gold. They'd developed rituals, shared coffee on the far bank, watching light change on canyon walls. "My brother wants to meet you," Sarah said one Friday. "Day of the Dead gathering. You could come if you want." Thomas was quiet then. "I'd like to come. Amy would have loved Day of the Dead. She always said the Mexican way of honoring the dead made more sense than pretending they never existed." Sarah smiled. "My grandmother felt the same, said grief was just love with nowhere to go. Day of the Dead gives it somewhere to go." That evening, Sarah arranged marigolds for her grandmother's ofrenda. Her hands shook slightly as she placed flowers around the photograph. Her phone rang. "Joe. So, do I need to give this Thomas guy the shovel talk?" Despite her nerves, Sarah laughed. "He's a good man, Joe." "Yeah, well, they all seem good at first. Thomas isn't Marcus. When I couldn't cross the bridge, he walked through the river with me." Long silence. "Okay. But I'm still bringing the shovel." Day of the Dead dawned crisp and clear. Sarah spent the morning cooking. Pozole, tortillas, sugar skull cookies, the house filled with the scents of memory. Thomas arrived carrying a basket. Inside, fresh bread, tequila, and at the bottom, a small framed photograph. "Is that Amy? Thought she might like to join the party, if that's okay." Sarah's throat tightened. "Of course it's okay." The ofrenda took up most of the living room wall, 3 tiers covered in marigolds, photos, offerings. Sarah placed Amy's photo among the others. Amy was laughing in the picture, caught mid-motion, vibrant with life. Tell me something she loved. Sunflowers, Thomas said immediately. Planted them every year, even in drought years. Said hope was never wasteful. Family began arriving at sunset. Joe cornered Thomas immediately, but within 10 minutes they were discussing water rights. Maria caught Sarah's eye and winked. He's different from Marcus, her mother said quietly, watching Thomas help Tia Rosa to a chair. Yes, he carries his grief well, like a river carries stones, shaped by it but not stopped. As darkness fell, they lit the candles. The photos seemed to come alive in the flickering light. They told stories, Joe about their grandmother chasing off a salesman with a broom, Thomas about Amy and the sunflowers. Later, Sarah found Thomas on the back porch. You okay? Yeah, just... This is the first time I've talked about her without feeling like I'm drowning. He looked at Sarah. Your family, this tradition, it makes grief feel less like an ending and more like a continuation. They sat in comfortable silence until Thomas said, I've been thinking about what comes next. With us. We've been walking through rivers for 2 months. At some point, don't we need to decide where we're going? Sarah took a breath. I've been thinking too. And I think I'm ready to try the bridge. With you. Thomas turned to look at her fully. You don't have to. I'll walk through that river with you forever if that's what you need. I know. That's why I can try. 3 days later, they met at the bridge as the sun painted the canyon. Sarah's whole body thrummed with nerves, but underneath was determination. How do you want to do this? Thomas asked. Together, side by side. They walked onto the bridge slowly. Sarah's hand found Thomas's, gripping tight. 10 feet. 20. The planks creaked. Halfway across, she stopped. I can't. Okay, Thomas said immediately. We can go back. No. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the past rush up, but also feeling Thomas's hand, solid and real. Just give me a minute. She opened her eyes, looked down at the water. Tell me about the sunflowers. Thomas squeezed her hand. They were ridiculous, 6 feet tall, faces as big as dinner plates. Amy said they were show-offs, but she loved them for it. Said there was nothing wrong with reaching for the sun, even if you looked foolish doing it. Sarah took a step. Another. Thomas matched her pace, and then they were across. Sarah was crying, great sobs that shook her whole body. Thomas pulled her close, and she cried into his shirt, for her grandmother, for the lost family, for all the years of fear, for the simple grace of finally being on the other side. When the storm passed, she pulled back. His eyes were wet too. Thank you, she whispered. You did it yourself. She kissed him. It wasn't planned or graceful, just a pressing need to close the distance. He made a soft sound of surprise, then kissed her back, gentle and sure. When they broke, both breathing unsteadily, Sarah said, I've wanted to do that for weeks. Just weeks. Thomas's smile was shaky. I've wanted it since you touched that handprint on the wall and looked like you were touching the face of God. They kissed again, there in the morning light with the river singing below. And Sarah thought about bridges, the ones we build, the ones we cross, the ones we sometimes have to go around. So what happens now? She asked when they finally made their way back to the eastern side, walking over the bridge this time, though Sarah's hand never left his. Thomas considered. Now we keep going. Tuesday and Friday crossings. Dinners at my place or yours. Your brother giving me the shovel talk at every family gathering. He did threaten you with a shovel, didn't he? Don't apologize. I'd do the same if I had a sister. He paused. And maybe we see where this river takes us. Together. Sarah smiled, thinking of her grandmother's baskets, each coil building on the last. Together, she agreed. As they reached their vehicles, Thomas said, "You know we'll need to find a new ritual, now that you can cross the bridge." Sarah considered. "Or maybe we keep the old one sometimes, the river crossing, to remember." "To remember," Thomas agreed. They parted with promises to see each other tomorrow, not a Tuesday or Friday, just a regular day that suddenly seemed full of possibility. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and began writing in the journal she'd started after her grandmother's death. She wrote about bridges and rivers, about fear and love, about a lonely rancher who understood that sometimes the only way forward was through. She wrote about Amy and her sunflowers, about her grandmother and her baskets, about how the dead stay with us in the stories we tell and the love we dare to feel again. And she wrote about crossings, how they're never really about getting to the other side. They're about who stands with you in the water. They're about learning that the long way around might be the shortest distance between two hearts. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and Sarah smiled. Let the storms come. She had someone to sit with her now, someone who understood that love wasn't about fixing or forgetting. It was about witnessing. It was about walking together through whatever waters life brought. The rain began as she closed the journal, fat drops hitting the windows like a benediction. Sarah thought of Thomas in his adobe house, maybe thinking of her. Tomorrow they'd see each other, and the day after, and all the days they were given for as long as the river ran. In the morning there would be coffee to share and plans to make. But tonight, Sarah Yazzie sat with her grandmother's photo and Amy's memory and her own brave heart, all of them together in the candlelight. All of them part of the same endless, beautiful story of how we find our way across the waters that divide us, one careful, faithful step at a time.